Hand embroidery has always seemed so unattainable to me. Sure, it looks pretty, but it takes 100 years, and I am simply not good at embroidery. But when I found photos online of a stunning 1850s era corset with tons of blue embroidery, I knew I had to give it a try. Do you want to see how I did it? I will be sharing how I drafted the pattern to my own measurements, made paper and fabric mock-ups for the pattern, and created this signature blue floral embroidery that the original corset had, how I sewed the corset, complete with new corset making techniques, at least to me, that I have never tried before. And finally, stay tuned to the end of the video to see how the corset fits and what my experience has been wearing it. Okay, so I drafted this pattern to my own measurements using a pattern from around the 1840s, which I found in corsets and crinolines. And this, of course, was my historical inspiration that I wanted to recreate the visual appearance of. I used a bodice block to draft the pattern to my measurements, and then I went on to make a paper mock-up and then a fabric mock-up. The fit was pretty good right off the bat, but there was just a few little things that I wanted to change, mostly with the fit of the bust, as well as looks like there was a bit of extra at the lower center front area that I wanted to take out. And there wasn't enough extra at the lower back area. I wanted it to flare out more to accommodate my natural sway back shape. Just taking in a little bit of excess at the center front area at the top. And lowering that top line just a smidgen. There's a lot of art when it comes to fitting a mock-up. It's definitely not something you just know how to do the first time. It takes a lot of trial and error for every mock-up I make. Okay, so it's time to cut out our fabric pieces for the final corset. I used white cotton sateen for the fashion fabric layer and white cotton coutil for the strength layer. So now I'm just laying out my pattern pieces on the fabric. Tracing around them first, which will be my stitching line, as there is no seam allowance included on this pattern. This is how I like to make all of my corset patterns for more accuracy. And then I go in and manually add seam allowance directly onto the fabric. And now cutting out my pieces. And here are my fabric pieces all cut out and with the stitching lines marked. Okay, so it's time to pin together our fabric panels. Here you see me pinning together some of the coutil panels. I opted to construct this corset with sort of a sandwich construction, in the sense that I first sewed together the coutil layers to each other, and then I sewed together the sateen layers to each other, rather than flatlining each individual fashion fabric to the strength layer. And just stitching those together, being very sure to maintain accuracy by stitching right along the marked sewing lines that I marked earlier. And there's my coutil panels all stitched together and ready to be trimmed and pressed over a tailor's hand. So first just going in with my fingers and then going in with the iron. Okay, so let's talk about the hand embroidery for this corset. I started out by drawing 2 paper templates for the 2 different areas of embroidery. And I also used this stabilizer for the embroidery since it was done on just the sateen layer. It's very lightweight. I took this embroidery with me on a road trip, so I don't have too much footage of it, but I traced my design onto there and then went around each shape with running stitches before filling them in with a satin stitch, and I used stem stitch for the flower stems. And that's the final result. Really exciting to see how that already adds so much flair to the fabric before it's even made into a corset. Okay, it's time to add our busk. So this is the first time you'll see me using cardboard in the construction of this corset. This is something I've been wanting to try for a long time, as cardboard was historically used as a reinforcement material in historical corsets. And so I opted to wrap this busk in cardboard. I used white Bristol board. And another benefit of this is that it protected the little bolts that are on the busk from rubbing through to the fabric and making dark marks, which is something that always happens to me on light colored corsets when it has not been wrapped in cardboard. So just changing out my sewing machine foot now to a narrow zipper foot to sew the top stitching around the busk, which will hold it in place now. I've got my busk inserted and held temporarily with quilting clips, and I'm beginning my top stitching. And there is the busk. It's all inserted now. This is always the most exciting point in any corset construction. So let's talk about the eyelets. I went ahead and first drew on my center back boning channels and then marked placement of my eyelets with 2 eyelets closer together at the waist level, and then I set them in place with a mallet. Okay, so I'm using cotton sateen that I'm cutting into strips to make my triple wide boning channels. This was another area where I opted to experiment with my white Bristol board as a reinforcement material inside of the boning channels. So the first instance that I used the cardboard was as a kind of pressing bar to press the sateen around to hold its shape. And now I am basting these channels on. This part was quite imperative for this particular corset because most of the channels had some degree of curve in them, side to side curve. And now I'm going ahead and stitching those channels on, first along the sides. And now I'm adding the lines of stitching in the middle of the channels that will divide each channel into 3 separate channels. Suffice it to say that I should have left these channels with a little bit more wiggle room, but we'll talk about that in a moment. So I used my lovely synthetic whalebone for this, and I'm just cutting it to length with my scissors and shaping the ends. And now I'm experimenting with a new technique of heating the boning and then bending it into shape only in the channels which did have some side-to-side curve in them. I wanted to experiment with the side-to-side bending properties of synthetic whalebone rather than just going for spiral steel, which is traditionally used in very curved boning channels. We'll talk more about how it turned out at the end of the video. So finally, I bound the top edge with blue silk and the bottom edge with white Petersham ribbon. And I added my bone flossing, which is one of the most iconic factors of this particular corset. I am so sorry, but somehow I lost the footage of me doing this, but suffice it to say that this was the most arduous part of the process. And I'll talk about more why that was at the end of the video. And finally, I added some nice heirloom cotton lace to the top. So how do I like this corset? Well, first of all, it fits quite well and it's quite comfortable. This is my first time ever trying the shorter above the hips fit of the mid-Victorian era of corsets. And I definitely quite like it. It's been quite a new experience of corsetry for me. I will say that the corset is currently a bit stiffer and a bit less curvy than my mock-up was in silhouette, but I chalk that up to just all the boning and the cardboard that was involved in the corset, and I'm sure I will soften up and shape to my body more over time. Which leads me to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is cardboard in corsets. What was my experience in working with this new but historical technique? So believe it or not, cardboard was often used in Victorian era corsets as a reinforcement for the boning channel areas. As someone who can wear holes in the boning channels of my corsets quite quickly, this sounded like a great idea to me. And that's why I decided to give it a try in this particular corset. It definitely helped give a clean, more crisp and structured look to the boning channels. However, it definitely added a whole other layer of complication to the construction of this corset, which is why I wouldn't recommend to a beginner corset maker to try this. Just do the more standard approach. It also obviously means that this corset can never be washed. It can only be either spot cleaned or dry cleaned, which is kind of annoying, especially seeing as it's a white corset, so it's gonna show the dirt more. But we'll just see how it goes. I could have left the boning channels a bit wider because the cardboard took up extra space in the channels, which made the insertion of the boning that much more difficult, especially in the curved boning channels. So let's talk about the hand embroidery on this corset. What was the takeaway for me from this project? Was the hand embroidery worth it? Did it take a really long time? I have been finding hand embroidery actually surprisingly approachable. Though it does obviously take a long time, I took this embroidery project along with me on a long road trip, and I was able to get a big chunk of it done just in the car, which otherwise would have been totally wasted hours. And the rest of it was pretty much exclusively done in front of Downton Abbey. So again, it was using up time that would have otherwise been wasted in terms of productivity. Thankfully, seeing as I'm a beginner embroiderer, I happened to be on a visit to my parents, and my sister-in-law, who is a very talented hand embroidery, hooked me up with some stabilizer, which she informed me is very important for when you're embroidering lightweight fabric. So that definitely worked out perfectly that I happened to be around her when I was doing this. And I used that for most of the embroidery on this corset. Okay, everyone, thanks so much for watching this video and joining me on this corset making adventure. I hope you liked it. If you did, please give the video a like, as it signals to YouTube that this is valuable content that's worth recommending to other viewers like yourself. Leave your comments and questions below, as well as check out the accompanying blog post with the written details and photos of this whole making process for your perusal and if you're making anything similar in the future. All of my social media accounts are also linked in the description, and if you love historical sewing like I do, you'll definitely want to subscribe to this channel for more historical sewing videos.